Hey guys, it's Susan. I'm sorry that it took so long for us to get some technical things taken care of. Can you guys let me know? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me and see me. That would be great, just so I can get these technical issues sorted out. So let me know if you can, and we will keep uh, chatting. So thumbs up. Can you guys hear me? Can you see me? Give me some idea so that I'm so that I can continue. Um, good. Can you hear me? Seeing you now, can see hear me. Okay, so I'm going to go with the fact that you guys can see and hear me. And if you see me looking over to the right a little bit, we were going to try to do this on my phone, and now I'm on my computer. So we are going to do it this way. So sorry I'm late. So welcome to the Backyard Garden Live, where plants are our friends and we love to get our hands dirty. I am so glad that you guys are here. And I'm going to start just to talk a little bit about myself so you know who I am. I'm a plant fanatic of sorts, and actually wanted to do this outside, but it's super windy today, and I thought you wouldn't be able to hear me. So I am now inside, coming to you live from the mountains of Arizona. So it's about 8,000 feet or so. Nothing like the low desert, like in Phoenix. Up here we have winters and it's cool. So now we're just getting ready for garden season. So I have garden fever, and depending on where you are probably just bursting into spring as well, and excited about gardening. And I hope we have a lot of new gardeners here, and also a lot of seasoned gardeners. It's excellent for you guys to be here and joining us on this garden live. So again, my name is Susan Patterson. Happy to have you guys here. Sorry, we're just getting things a little fixed with our technical difficulties. Some of you may have some of my books. I am blessed to be able to have written 4 top-selling garden books. And hope you guys have some copies of them. This one, The Secret Garden, was my first book, and it's an amazing garden that talks about fruits and veggies and soil, a little bit of history of gardening. If you haven't picked up a copy of this, we'll let you know how you can get this one. My next book, really enjoyed this one, The Backyard Harvest, and it's all about container gardening. So if you live in an apartment or have a small balcony or just love containers, this book is full of awesome container projects where you can grow food and beautiful flowers in containers. And some of these you can bring in to have all year long too. The next book that I've written and really enjoyed was The Hydroponic Garden Secret. This actually is a real favorite with people. I think people are really looking at doing hydroponic gardening on a home level. And in this book, I give you some really good ideas of how you can set up your own hydroponic system. Not difficult at all. Don't let that intimidate you. Hydroponic gardening is really quite easy, and you don't even have to get your hands dirty to have fun with this. And my most recent book is the Instant Box Garden Miracle, and it's my only full color book. So it's a really pretty book, a big book, a thick book with lots of information on how to do these elevated box gardens and also box gardens on the ground. And so I have included some of my favorite theme gardens in here, like a power smoothie garden, a magical moonlight garden, a lemonade garden. You're really going to love this book too, especially if you have a bad back or, like me, bad knees, and you don't want to bend over or can't bend over anymore to garden. These elevated raised beds, which I teach you how to make in this book, are awesome. They make garden accessible for everybody. And that's something that I'm super passionate about, is making garden accessible for anyone, no matter where you live, whether you live in the city and you have a patio or a balcony, or you have a lot of garden space, or you have issues with your back or your knees. I love that. And I've been gardening for a long time. My mom turned me on to gardening. My grandmother had a market and a farm, and I homeschooled my now 3 adult children, and gardening and getting our hands dirty was a big part of our curriculum and our learning. So I'm still learning. I don't think we ever stop learning as gardeners. We're on this journey, and that is really the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about today, is that gardening is a journey. It's not something that we say we're going to put a butterfly garden out there in that spot in our yard and we're going to be done. we're never really done. We are always evolving and creating and imagining and adding. And there's nothing that I like more than to create a garden space and go back and revisit it in a couple of years and add all sorts of new stuff to it and just really change it up. So gardening and a garden plot to me is like a tapestry. So now there's lots of reasons why you might want to garden. So let me know in the comment section, I'm kind of trying to follow along there, what it is you really want to learn about gardening. If you're a newbie gardening, if you want to grow food or flowers, or both, or herbs. So let me know there. Providing food for our family is something that's really important now. We have our food supply is not always sure. We have some issues with health and safety, with E. coli and salmonella and that sort of thing. And if, for me, if I can grow my own food, I can control my own food, I know what I'm putting on my table. So that is one of the main reasons why I like to grow my own food, because I know where it's coming from. I can choose the plants, I can choose the seeds, and I have that control over the healthiest food for my family. So, when I was brainstorming what we were going to talk about today, I thought, let's just do an introductory call, a video chat here about just maybe some myths to dispel, some encouragement for some of you new gardeners, and just sort of an overview. And we're going to get more granular in later episodes where we talk specifically about soil. We talk specifically about choosing the best plants for where you live, irrigation, watering, composting. And we're going to do some hands-on activities that are super fun, things that you can do that don't take a whole lot of time, a whole lot of money, and not many tools. So the first thing I want to say is that I want to be encouraging to you. I want to be let you know that when you say maybe to yourself or other people, I don't have a green thumb, I kill plants, I hear that all the time. First and foremost, you can garden. Once you get the fundamentals down, you can grow beautiful house plants, beautiful plants outdoors. You can feed your family. I don't like to see anybody give up. And so that's why we're going to kind of talk about some of these main principles of gardening just to get started, to dispel some of these myths. So first of all, how many of you know that plants don't need us? So we don't do anything but partner with plants. They're our partners. I'm going to show you if you can see this seed. Anybody know what kind of seed this is? This is actually a bean seed. And it's actually one of the bigger seeds when you look at vegetable seeds and flower seeds, this bean seed. But what I want to tell you is that inside this seed, it's everything that this plant needs to grow. They want to grow. Plants are genetically made to grow. They want to grow. They want to protect themselves. They want to do everything in their power to survive. And so it's amazing to think it's all inside this little seed. But the key principle here is, and what you need to remember is plants want to work with us, not against us. Now, for those of you who are new to gardening, that's empowering. That's like, okay, so I'm going to partner with the plant. It really wants to be successful. And so we need to remember that when we get started in gardening. And here's another tip, something that we need to remember when it comes to gardening is that sometimes we love our plants too much. Now, what am I talking about? Sometimes we water too much, we feed too much, and we handle too much. I have a perfect example for you here today. This little guy. And you might say, oh, wow, he looks like really droopy. He doesn't look very healthy. This is a spider plant that I transplanted a couple days ago. Now, first of all, I moved it from its original home, right? I took it out of its one pot and I put it in this other pot. Everything's all new to it. And so it's in a little bit of transplant shock right now. So the other problem we had is that my cat was eating it also. So it's not very happy. But this is a good example of handling maybe too much. The cat was eating on it. I was moving it. It was all happening at one time. And this guy's rebelling and saying, you know what? I'm floppy. I'm not happy. But here's the thing. Plants are amazingly forgiving. You give this guy a little bit of water, set him in the sun, and he is going to perk right up. So I'm looking forward to the next couple of days when that plant is going to recover and look really, really good. So I see some of these comments coming in here. Container gardening as food. I want to learn more about container gardening, and we will get to that. We might not talk about that today, but we're going to talk about that in the future. But for those of you who are interested, this Backyard Harvest book is the one that you want to get that talks about container gardening. And just a tip about container gardening before we move on, you need to make sure you use really loamy, light soil. Okay, for flowers and for food in containers, you need to make sure you have a big enough container so that you can accommodate the mature plant. Too often people will put a plant that is new, a young plant, in a fairly small pot, and then what happens is the plant gets root bound. It doesn't have anywhere to go, and then it's not happy. And so we want to make sure we accommodate for the large size of the mature plant. So make sure you do that, and make sure you remember that you have to have a container that has adequate drainage. There are very few plants, except those that love to thrive in bog gardens, that like to have wet feet, is what they call it, or wet roots. They don't like to be saturated. So make sure that you have plenty of drainage in your pots, no matter what you're going to grow them in. And plants, for the most part, will grow in just about any kind of container. They're really happy as long as they have good soil and drainage, and they're getting plenty of water. Keep in mind that plants that are in a container the roots don't have as far to stretch out to go get water. So they need to be watered more frequently. I normally say you can stick your finger down 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and if it's dry, it needs water. So water them thoroughly and water them deep. So it's just a couple tips for the container gardening. I just saw those comments coming in along the side. So let's talk about some basics. If you're new to gardening, there's another question. So Taylor wants to know, what do you do if you have a ceramic pot with no drainage holes? It depends on what you're growing, Taylor. Sometimes I do some herbs in ceramic pots without drainage holes. Of course, it would be best if you could make some, but you can also put some gravel. So a little bit of pea gravel down there in the bottom, and that will help wick the water away from the plant. Just a little bit of pea gravel or something, but best if you can get those drainage holes in there. So we'll get back to a couple questions in a minute, but let's talk about some fundamentals of gardening. Rule number one, or thought number one: plants die. Yes, they do. And I still have plants die. I've been gardening for a long time, and they still die every once in a while. And that's just something that we have to be forgiving of for ourselves. I mean, don't be hard on yourself if you have a plant die. And for sure, don't hang up your garden gloves if you have a plant die, because let me tell you what happens when a plant dies, or it's a sick plant. It gives you an opportunity to research, to learn, to grow, to evolve, and to become a better gardener. So we all have plants die, circumstances, things happen. We have frost, we overwater, perhaps they get some sort of a sickness. But it does happen, but we learn from that. That's important. And here's another slogan that I stole or kind of changed around from Nike. It's just plant it. So don't overthink gardening. Okay, don't overthink, what am I going to do? What if this happens? Just plant it. Plants are incredibly, again, forgiving. And we just want to get in there, get our hands dirty, trial and error. This journey that we're on, this gardening journey that we're on, is full of trial and error. 90% of what I've learned in gardening, I've learned from making mistakes. I've learned a lot from some really great gardeners who've given me really great advice, but a lot of it has been from making mistakes. So don't be afraid to make mistakes, okay? And don't be afraid to just plant it. I mean, learn what you can about it, know where you should put it, understand what it needs, but just plant it. So here's another fundamental of gardening that I want to get through to you, and that is that gardening is really a marriage between art and science. Yes, there's a lot of science when it comes to plants, botany, Latin names, understanding how plants make food, understanding how they use food, understanding how they create cells to grow, et cetera, et cetera. But the good news is that you don't have to know all of that science to be successful. Now, if you're interested in science, by all means, there's lots of botany classes online you can take. Even a botany coloring book is a great way to learn the parts of plants and how they work together. It's an incredible and amazing science, but not necessarily necessary for you to be successful. The art part of it is usually more attractive to certain types of people. I'm more of an art gardener. I just love creating that tapestry of colors and textures and aromas in the garden. Even in my food gardens, incorporating in companion plants and flowers that look beautiful. To me, that's like how I cook without a recipe. So it's intuitive gardening, and it's okay to do that, right? If you know the fundamentals, you don't have to have a science degree to successfully garden. So it's really important to understand that. Okay, this one too. You will find your own groove. As a gardener, you'll get in the groove, you'll find your groove, you'll get all the information that's coming in from books and people that you know, and maybe garden clubs. There's great community garden clubs that you can get plugged into. And then eventually you'll get in your own groove. You'll find things that work for where you live, that work for the time you have, that work for the type of garden that you have, the plants that you're planting, and that's okay. There's there's just the basics that we talk about, but then there's this idea of getting in your own groove, being your own gardener, and we're all unique. We all do things a little differently. I might do something different than my mother did. My mother might do something different than her grandmother did. But we're building knowledge. Is cumulative. We're building this knowledge and learning as we go. So I'm going to take another quick peek here at some of these questions over here. So Nish, hey, thanks for joining us. You're asking, what tips do you have for beginners that live in the city with no green space? Oh, yes. So I want you to be a successful gardener in the city with no green space. It's amazing how many urban gardens are popping up in big cities. I spent a year in Phoenix and I saw, plants hanging off of balconies and all sorts of interesting configurations for successful gardening. If you have a patio, if you have access to a patio, then I would strongly encourage you to think about vertical growing in containers. So for instance, a relatively small container of cucumbers will climb a very long ways, and we can put up a nice trellis or sorts. It actually acts as a nice partition between us and our neighbors and still grow food. Containers work fabulously hanging off of your balcony, or like I said, the vertical growing. Just know when you get your sun and take a look around and see what things your plants need that you're planting, but you can be very successful on a small patio or a balcony. The other thing that you might want to consider is doing some hydroponics. So again, I have that hydroponic book right here, and you might want to get a copy of that because there's some fun projects in there. Don't even require electricity or a pump, and you can successfully grow all sorts of things without soil inside with the aid of some grow lights. So I hope I answered that question. You definitely can grow lots of things in a small space using containers. And I'd be happy to follow that up later with some of my suggested varieties, and that you always want to pick like a dwarf variety or something that's not going to overpower your patio. So getting back to a couple things I just want to talk about here, and then I'll answer some more questions. Let's talk about the fact that plants are alive. I know that may sound kind of stupid. You're like, I know they're alive. They make their own food. They give us oxygen. They are alive, and they need certain things to thrive. And once you get that down, what they need to thrive, well, let's talk about sunlight. They need water. They need the macronutrients in the soil. They are good to go. But remember, it's a living thing, and our job as gardeners is to help that plant get established. For cultivators of the garden, we need to understand what the plant needs, but first and foremost, understand that it's living just like you and I, and it needs certain things to thrive. The second thing is we need to love and care for what we can't see. So let's go back to this spider plant again, this little sad spider plant. I mean, what we see is up here. And so we're like, how do I make this greener? How do I make it stand up taller? How do I make it more vibrant? Well, we do that primarily by caring about what we can't see. So what is it that's below the surface? That's the root system. We can't see it, but we have to, as gardeners, embrace that it exists, understand how it works, and love it, which means give it what it needs. The first responsibility is to give a plant the right conditions to develop a strong root system. And the reason for that is because the roots are what spread out, take in the moisture, the water from the earth, from the soil, and the nutrients, and use that to feed the plant. And we have to make sure that we are creating that system or helping the plant create that system right out of the gate. If you want delicious red tomatoes that are big and beautiful, you have to have strong roots. If you want happy, tall, bright yellow sunflowers that just are gorgeous in your landscape, you need good roots. So think roots first. It's very important to think of how we can create a strong and healthy plant by paying attention to the roots. So I also want to touch on a couple of misconceptions about roots. A lot of people think that the roots grow the same way the upper part, say, of a tree might grow, and they don't. They actually usually go a long ways vertically as opposed to horizontally. There's a couple different types of roots. There's a tap root that shoots straight down and a fibrous root that goes more straight out. Now, a tap root that you might be familiar with is a carrot, and that stores the food. So let's talk about a few things that roots actually do, okay? If I ask the question, who can give me one thing that roots do? I've already given you that they take up water and take up nutrients, but what's something else that's important about roots? Anyone want to try to answer that? And then we'll see who can tell us what is an important function of the root of a plant. I don't see anybody. So, all right, roots are important. Number one, yes, there we go. I wasn't patient enough. Hi, Karen. Yes, definitely. To anchor the plant. They keep a plant, yes, B. They stabilize the plant. Karen's right. Cynthia, you're right. Stabilize the plant. They anchor the plant in the ground. If it weren't for a sturdy root system, you'd have this wavering back and forth in any kind of weather. So the roots need to be strong. They need to be healthy in order to anchor the plant. And again, we said they absorb the water. All the water that plants need when we plant outside is found in the earth, in the soil. We might like spritz plants because it perks them up and it makes them look nice, but the real heavy feeding, the water that plants need, comes from the ground. And that we'll get into that when we talk more, about watering and why it's important not to actually water the plant, but to water what? The ground around the plant so that it can actually grow roots and reach and pull it in. And then acquiring nutrients. Yes, Heather, you're correct. To provide stability and nourishment, and also to store food. We did talk about that. The fact that is where the plants store the sugar that, say you have a perennial plant that's going to come back again next year. They're storing all their energy in that root system. The top part of the plant dies away, but the roots are still thriving and have that source of food that they're going to use to burst forward in the next season. So that is definitely important to understand. You need to understand what kind of roots you're dealing with your plant, and again, how to develop that system. So I want to get into just a little bit of basic garden terminology. Now, if you are an experienced gardener, bear with me. I just kind of want to talk about this in this first video chat so that in the future, when I make mention of these things, we're all on the same page. So an annual. An annual plant is one that grows for a season and then dies. So you purchase annuals at your local nursery, garden center, and normally we do like to put annuals in pots. We put them in all different sorts of containers. We use them for filler in our garden. We use them for edging and that sort of thing. And annuals have a season. They're done. Sometimes they reseed, which is kind of exciting, and they come back up the next year. But by and large, annuals, marigolds and petunias are great examples of annuals. So that is, when I talk about annuals, that's what I'm talking about. So a biennial is a plant that requires 2 years. In the first year, they just put their shoots up, they put their leaves up, they get their root system established, but you don't have any fruit or any flowers. It's in the second year that happens, and then generally the plant dies. So it's kind of a 2-year deal. Let's see, a California poppy is a good example of a biennial plant. Now, again, you might have some volunteers, we call them, that pop up in the next years. following, but generally speaking, it's a 2-year cycle for that plant, and then that plant's done. A tender perennial, if you live in a really warm region like Florida, southern Florida, what's a tender perennial to me up here in the mountains of Arizona at 8,000 feet is actually a perennial to you. You could have it all year long. I can't up here. So those of us that live in colder regions where we have a winter, we can plant these tender perennials for the season, and then either bring them into the house, or we can just plant new ones the next year. But I tend to bring them in. If you look behind me, that's a common geranium. And that fella was really, really happy in Phoenix all year. But if I tried to put him outside right now where we still have chilly nights, it wouldn't be a good thing. But once we have our last frost, that can go back out. And then you have hardy perennials, which are generally good in areas where we have a lot of snow and cold winters. We plant these plants, and they last for the season, and then the top part, like I said, dies off, but it comes back again the next year. I love perennials. Perennials are really easy. They're really forgiving. They're fun. And again, remember to make sure you check your labels to see, what growing zone you're in, to see what's a perennial for you. So as a gardener, you need to aim for balance. Okay, that's something I wanted to mention. You need good soil, proper sun, sufficient water, and nutrients. Those are the things that we're doing. And again, remember what I said at the beginning, which is that we're partners with the plants. They want to survive. They want to thrive. They want to provide food for you. They want to grow big and strong and healthy. And our job is to know what they need, when they need it, and provide it. So let me take a break here and look at some of the questions that I have here. Okay, this is Alyssa asking questions about her 4-year-old peach tree that's thriving. It's 10 foot tall, but not producing. So I guess, do you have a male and a female peach tree? Sometimes we don't do that, and then we're not going to get that pollination that we need to produce the fruit. The other thing, Alyssa, would be feeding. It's really important early in the season to be feeding. I use all organic compost tea and various other organic compounds to feed, and lots of water early in the season. So that's super important too. If you want to give me a note about what variety you have, I can give you a little bit more information on potentially why you're not seeing any type of fruit off of that. So let's see, Barb, can you use harvested water for food plants or gray water? Yes and no. So it can be kind of complicated. I love the idea of a gray water system. However, if we're using chemicals or non-organic soap and other chemicals that are going into our gray water, then you don't want to put it on your plants, especially on plants that you're going to actually eat. You don't want that. So if you can set up a gray water system and you're not using anything but organic compounds in your home, then by all means. I'm a big fan of gray water systems, a big fan of rainwater systems for irrigation. In Arizona, we have monsoon season. So we have a ton and a ton and a ton of rain in a small period of time. And so what I do is I fill up rainwater systems from my gutters on my house in several places, and they go into different tanks, and then I use that water, because then we, of course, have dry season. So that is definitely a thing. I see that, Nish, you're asking where would you recommend getting seeds online that are organic and non-GMO? I'd be happy to provide that. I will make some notes at the end of this, and we will sorry, I'm looking at the questions. We will leave that down below. So yeah, what about using one of those rain buckets, which we just talked about, afraid of being a mosquito garden? Okay, especially if you live in the East, you need to be concerned about mosquitoes, or buy another water source. They do make tablets that you can actually put in your rainwater system. And in your pond and any other sitting water, because yes, we don't want to draw mosquitoes to our property. So if you use those little tablets, they work fantastic. I use them to keep mosquitoes out of my pond and any other water source that I have. So you can definitely use those. So If I miss your question, I'm going to go back and I will get to those definitely. And any questions that I miss or don't answer, I'll look through and we'll talk about the next time that we get together, that we can get a little more granular with some of these questions. I have a couple questions that were sent into me, and this one is a common question that I get as a gardener all the time. And if you're a seasoned gardener, you might get it too. But why did my plant die? So, for instance, I had someone who said, I just planted a rose bush. I did everything I was supposed to. I made the hole big enough. I put good compost in there, and whatever, watered it initially, and then in 2 weeks it was dead. When I say just plant it, it's not like just plant it and forget it, because new plants, the most common reason why any new plants die is because they didn't get enough water to get an established root system. Either the watering was too shallow and it just kind of runs off the surface of the soil, or it wasn't deep enough, or it wasn't enough. That's the most important thing in the first 3 to 4 weeks when we have plants. We want to help that plant develop a strong root system. And one of the ways we do that is by consistent and deep watering. So we don't want to have, we don't want to have that water running off. So if you're having trouble with plants dying, then you definitely want to make sure you're watering at the beginning. Oh yeah, this is perfect. B's giving us some more advice on the rain barrels. 3 tablespoons of olive oil in your barrel with cotton balls, in overflow drain with goldfish inside barrel for mosquito control. There are a number of different things that you can do to control mosquitoes. So if you know that you're in a mosquito prone area, that's a great suggestion. Make sure that you're taking the necessary steps to not make that become a place where they're a mosquito magnet. So here was another question somebody asked me the other day. And I'm going to ask you guys and see who wants to answer this. Why do gardeners always fuss with the roots before they put a plant in the ground? Why are they always mushing them around and then planting it? Does anyone know the answer to that? Why we fuss with roots? So I'll give you just a second to answer. All right, I don't see, so they spread out. Okay, Barb, great. Yes, because here's what happens. We're called as gardeners to liberate the roots. Now in nature, when we go like to a meadow or a forest, and plants are growing without any aid from us, they have self-liberated. They have long tap roots. They've done what they've needed to do to survive, the survival of the fittest. But we need to break them up. When you get a potted plant, have you ever seen it when it's all circled around and tight and whatever? That's called root bound. And there's no way for those roots, and I like to think of them as like all kinds of individual straws that go back to the stem of the plant. There's no way for them to get the nutrients and water they need if they're all bound up. So if we just take a bound up root ball plant and we put it in the ground, that root system's going to be like, oh, I can't get out, I can't get out, I can't get out. So we need to liberate them. We need to let them go free. And don't be afraid to, I like to squeeze the pot a little bit, and getting the plant out, squeeze. And then when I pull it out, I do a lot of mashing of the roots and pulling them out and getting them, untangled. And don't even be afraid to snip. Give it a haircut. Right? What happens when we cut our hair, right? Generally, it grows longer, it's healthier, it's revitalized. Same thing goes for roots. A clean pair of garden scissors and cut your roots before you put it in the plant. Don't be afraid. You're not hurting it. You're actually helping it. So that is an important thing to know before you plug a plant in the ground. And I like to say that too, that we're plugging plants in because, of course, the soil is electrically charged, plant's alive, we're going to plug it in. Don't forget to liberate the roots. I had a question from Jackie in South Dakota. She wanted to know the difference between organic seeds and regular seeds. And I think somebody earlier was asking me where we would get non-GMO organic seeds. There's a lot of different types of seeds. There's heirloom seeds, there's open pollinated seeds, there's hybrid seeds. And organic seeds are just seeds that are raised in a non-conventional manner. Today, most plants, most seeds, and unfortunately a lot of our food is grown in such a way that there's pesticides, herbicides, and a lot of chemicals used in order to get the product that we desire. So organic seeds are grown from organic plants where they don't use anything but organic and natural pesticide, not pesticide, organic, like pest control, or companion planting or that sort of thing. So I like organic seeds, really. I like to be sure that I don't have any kind of coating on my seeds. A lot of times they'll coat them with some sort of a pesticide. So when you purchase seeds, make sure you're asking first, because you don't want those kind of seeds. So Jody in North Carolina asked, when can I safely plant annuals in the spring? Oh, that's a good question. I get so excited where I am. And if you live in a place where it's sort of like you have one day where it's really warm and nice, and then the next day it's cold. The nights might still be cold, but the daytime it's nice in the 60s, and you're excited. You see things popping up from the ground and you're ready to plant. I get like that. And I've made a lot of mistakes in the past, because I'll go out and buy a bunch of annuals and I'll pop them in the ground and it'll frost. We'll have another light frost or even a freeze, and I don't have any more annuals because they can't take that. They can't take that freeze or frost. So the best thing to do is, if you don't know when your last average frost date is, so when is the last time? Here, we don't plant anything where I am until after Mother's Day. I just don't even touch it anymore because it just doesn't work for me. So you need to make sure that you find out. And if you don't know, check with your local cooperative extension office. Just give them a call and say, hey, for this region, when is our last expected frost date? And they will tell you. And then be sure when you purchase your annuals that you read the tag. It'll tell you, whether they want shade or sun or how much they want, and put them in a place where they're going to be happy. But first and foremost, don't go spend a bunch of money on annuals because you think it's time to plant, and then you end up having, now sometimes if you just plant a small area, you can cover, that area with plastic or something to protect it from the weather. So questions. I'm back with you to ask any other final questions. What I do want to tell you is that we're going to, like I said, try to get granular with these. The next time we get together, we may talk about soil. I think somebody might have asked that question up here further about, what do I do with my soil to get it ready for planting? One of the most important things you need to do with your soil is test it. So you can get a testing kit from your local cooperative extension office as well. It'll tell you what nutrients it's missing. That's really important to know what you're working with. If your soil is lacking organic compounds, which a lot of soil is, you want to start to work some of that into your soil. If you're planting straight into the ground, you want to be able to get some composted material, some organic material, and work that well into the soil, let it sit for a little while. I like to cover my ground in the early spring before I plant with black plastic to let it heat up, absorb the nutrients. I'm always adding mulch and various other organic compounds to my soil to build it up. We're going to talk about this more when we talk about soil, but a good soil is like a good foundation in a home. If it doesn't drain well, if it's rocky, if it's full of clay, if it's sandy, plants won't have what they need to survive. So we really want to pay attention to building up the structure of the soil so that it is strong and able to provide the nutrients that we need. So if there aren't any other questions, I've had a good time here. I'm sorry for the little glitch at the beginning with the technical problem. Hopefully we'll get that taken care of for next time. And I'd love for you to submit your questions to me that you have anything to do with gardening. You can put it in the feed here, and I'll try to get to it sooner or later. But like I said, we're going to do some fun projects. We're going to be hands-on. And we're going to learn about those basic fundamentals of gardening so that everyone, including your children, your whole family, can be successful. So I thank you very much for joining me here today. And if you haven't already had a chance to get copies of my books, The Secret Garden, The Hydroponic Garden, the Backyard Harvest, and the Instant Box Garden Miracle. These are full of great information that you can have to just continue to learn more and more. And Barb, thank you for liking my goat picture. I get mixed reviews on that one, but I like my goat picture. I love goats. So thank you. And remember that plants are our friends. We want to work together in getting our hands dirty to create beautiful and bountiful gardens. So this is Susan Patterson again, and I thank you for joining me, and I hope to see everybody soon. Take care.